Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tribeca New Music's inView series, where we interview our amazing artists and composers in our upcoming concerts every season. I am Kate, and today I'm here with one of our members from the Bergamot Quartet, who will be performing in our upcoming show at the DiMenna Center on November 2nd. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the quartet?
Hi everyone, my name is Ledah Finck and I play violin with the Bergamot Quartet. We're really excited to be back at Tribeca New Music this year for another performance featuring the winner of the Best in Score competition.
So in our upcoming concert on November 2nd, we have a ton of really cool music with a lot of very eclectic influences from modern songwriting to folk to Bach to like 80s and 70s rock music. Is there anything in this lineup that kind of took you or the Bergamot Quartet by surprise or excited you to perform these pieces? And then was there any hardships with dealing with such a wide range of influences for this concert?
Well, honestly, as a quartet that specializes in contemporary classical music, I think we're
Mhm.
pretty used to seeing music all the time that's kind of all over the map.
Yeah.
And this program is pretty representative of that. So I don't know that we have any big surprises, but it's a really fun program that I'm very excited about. And it's so cool too that we're getting to bring back um, Zach Lilliboff Davis's piece, which was written
Right.
for us several years ago, and
Hmm.
we haven't had a chance to perform since then. So um, some old friends on this program, and
Hmm.
yeah, a lot of different repertoire. Um, we have a lot of fun visiting different styles of music and getting to know composers who are writing in a wide variety of styles. So um, it's gonna be an eclectic and fun program.
Well, and then you said in your past interview with Maya, like the downside of classical training is it become limiting when you're just thinking about the technique. How do you and the Bergamot Quartet kind of balance that back and forth between like really bringing the respect needed to the music, but also understanding that it's not necessarily like a totally classical influence? Especially with music that can be so technically dense too.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that I think about a lot. I personally come from both a classical and more of a folk background, and I do a lot of
Mm.
improvised music. Um, and as a quartet, we are kind of actively working on building our comfort levels with playing in different styles, with improvising together, playing by ear. Um, I think we all feel that our classical training is really at the core of what we're doing
Mhm.
as Bergamot Quartet. Um, we learn a lot of music and we're really passionate about bringing as much skill as possible to brand new music and learning its language. Um, so I think that the element of classical training that is really deeply embedded in our practice as a string quartet is really important because it gives us those technical skills to um, be equipped to dive in at a really high technical level right off the bat and share these just kind of chamber music skills of listening, adapting, phrasing, shaping music.
Mhm.
Um, but in order to be open to the wide range of music that we often find ourselves playing, I think it's really important that we have a pretty expansive sense of technique and what technical ability means.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of this program, that looks like a few different things. Zach's piece, Iridescence, is an interesting example of that. He uses a lot of like boxed notation in his piece for us, where there's sort of not an entirely fixed um, set of notes. There's kind of open repeats of things. It's very gestural. Um, it's a piece about space, so it makes a lot of sense. It's very expansive, but we're having to make decisions that I think push the limits of kind of our classical score interpretation skills in order to um, make sense of our performance of the piece. Um, the piece that I wrote for Bergamot also it does a similar thing where there's specifically written notes but no fixed duration for a lot of the musical material. So we're just kind of being very actively out of our scores, cueing on to different passages very visually. There's a vocal
Mhm.
element to that piece too. The whole quartet is vocalizing.
Right, yeah.
Um, so that's something that I'm really grateful for Sarah and Amy and Irene, my colleagues, to be open to is using their voices, their actual voices beyond their instrumental voices.
Hmm.
Um,
I mean,
for
yeah, it definitely speaks to your level of collaboration, that you can be so out of the score too. And also, that was one of the questions I had was your more newly composed work, as of summer 2024, which will be performed on November 2nd, Something More Than Itself. I would love to hear more about your influence from the Danish poet Inger. Tell me if I'm pronouncing this wrong. Inger Christensen, right?
that's how I
No.
say it.
Okay, okay. And how his poetry influenced your current compositions that focus more on singer-songwriting or vocal use in the quartet.
Yeah, so Inger Christensen is actually a female poet who died in the early 2000s, I think. And for this piece, I took some text from a work of hers that was published in 1969. It's called It. Um, it's sort of a long form work of poetry that's like novella sized. Um, and I'm just kind of obsessed with her poetry. I just love it. I like it's the kind of writing that I'll get to the end of the book and then immediately go back to page one.
Hmm.
So after reading it for the first time, I just the whole way through was like hearing different musics in my head as I read. And so I had kind of marked up my whole copy with excerpts that I particularly wanted to put into a musical context. And this was just one that spoke to me. It's a very short, just 4 lines of text that I excerpted from it um, for this piece. But you'll hear the text of the poem spoken and sung within the piece. And it goes from um, this more kind of open section I was referring to before, um, to a really textural kind of atmospheric middle section that does not include a textual element, and then into a final section that's more like a song verse where I'm singing and not playing, and the others are building kind of a sonic environment around that. Um, the text itself is pretty abstract. Um, so one challenge with writing the piece was to provide like sonic context for the text. What I wanted to do was basically take this very abstract and small text and kind of explode it out into this really multisensory world that it suggests to me through sound. So that's why I've chosen to share to work with the text in different ways within the same piece. Um, and it's the kind of thing where no two performances are going to be exactly the same because of this open element. We might, one performance could be really long, one could be kind of zip through it.
I mean, personally, like I'm a huge fan of sacred music. I'm not religious, but I do I love sacred music, and part of that love is like you have kind of the same text over and over and over and over
Mhm.
again. I mean, especially in Christian sacred music, of course. But the way it's set and the way that world is expanded is just so fascinating and it's endless. And there's so much you can
Mm.
do with like just one line that, I mean, Kyrie, like what else, there's like hours of music composed on that one word. So I find that really cool. Is there
Mhm.
what is the subject matter of that poem in your piece?
Um, that's a good question. And that's a really interesting comparison too that you're making to religious texts, because I think I hadn't really thought about that, but I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, and maybe it was kind of an unconscious inspiration for me too. Just having played a lot of religious music as a classical violinist
No
over the
doubt, yeah.
years. Um, but what this excerpt does, the way that the book it is structured is there's just like a lot of very short, like generally just a few lines long, kind of sub poems that are organized into chapters, which are organized into larger settings, and they
Mhm.
all kind of go through the same format from section to section, but the subject matter jumps around wildly, and it's all pretty abstract. This fragment that I chose uh, takes like nature related words and
Mhm.
pairs them with like human man-made or human body part words. So
Okay.
the first line is water steps, stone skies, wind houses. Um, I don't know what I don't know what it means, but I love the way it sounds, and
Yeah.
I love the way that it gives me a sense of something, um, something more than itself. That's
Hmm.
kind of where the title that I chose comes from. Um,
Oh yeah, I love that. Something more than itself. And then this is, obviously more of a vocal work, um, especially within the context of a string quartet. Uh, what are some singer-songwriters that have influenced you lately, to compose something like this?
hmm. um, I got to hear Meredith Monk's latest work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is I wrote it before I heard this piece, but she's been an inspiration for me for a long time, so has been kind of on my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I find it really fascinating the way that she does or doesn't use text in her work, which is all vocal. The piece that I heard just a couple of weeks ago, there was no text the entire piece, and it was this whole kind of semi-staged, like an hour and a half or 2 hour long work with a lot of singing, but no actual words were spoken. But it was just deeply evocative and narrative. And I've always been really inspired by the way that she very kind of choicely uses text um, when she does use actual English or otherwise, um, versus just kind of sounds that suggest a conversation or a fight or a joke or something. She can express so much with just like mouth sounds.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think it's really amazing. I'm always listening to a lot of Laura Marling. It's not really directly musically related, but she's one of my favorite singer-songwriters, and I think that her um, the way that she writes songs is just incredibly brilliant.
Mm.
Um, and she's very much writing within the genre of like playing guitar, singing, pretty straightforward, but um, she can craft these just like really heart-wrenching scenes with not a lot of text, not a lot of musical content. And beyond that, I the kind of music that I gravitate to is often very textural. Yeah, I guess just thinking a lot about placing words or sounds within a landscape of some sort.
Yeah. I should listen to those artists more. But I also wanted to speak to you more about your relationship with Eli Greenhoe, composer of Bildungsroman. Is that
Yeah.
Bildungsroman? A piece the Bergamot Quartet will be playing selections from in our upcoming concert. How did this collaboration with Eli begin with the Bergamot Quartet?
So I've actually known Eli for a long time, coming up on 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
We met at a Young Composers Festival in Vermont. And Eli is a really close friend of mine. He and I have a experimental folk duo project together called Freddie and Sally. Um, but Eli's classical compositions are really amazing, and we've been wanting to work with him for a long time. We actually started this Bergamot and Eli collaboration a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's been a cool process because we didn't really have a game plan for it. We just knew that he wanted to write us like an evening length work, and we didn't really have even funding at the time, or a performance or recording plan. We just kind of figured that we would just work on it as we felt like working on it. So the piece has gone through many different iterations. It started out as a piece about knots. It's not really about knots anymore. um, but there is still this sense of really playing with um, time in a way that like bunches things up and then stretches it out. And I haven't seen the whole piece yet. He's still writing
Right,
it.
yeah. How long is it supposed to end up being then?
We're thinking it'll be around 45 minutes in total.
Okay.
We're just playing one movement for this performance.
Hmm.
And Bildungsroman's the title of the work as a whole. The movement that we're going to play is called Mirror Braid.
Hmm.
Um, we were thinking we might play a newer movement, but he's like still writing it. So we'll be able to share that with the world soon, but not on November 2nd.
Right, right.
But I think this will be our first performance of Mirror Braid, this one movement. It's a substantial movement. It's about 10 minutes long.
Mhm.
It'll be our first performance in New York at a major venue. So we're really excited to do that and share that piece. It's really cool.
Oh yeah, super cool. And what's the overall subject matter for, well, what's the translation of Bildungsroman?
Well,
It
so a Bildungsroman is a genre. It's like
Oh,
a coming of age story.
oh, oh, cool.
Um, And I don't know, and I'm not sure that Eli fully knows exactly how this will take sh shape over the course of the whole piece.
They're kind of
The
like
cool
a,
thing about this really long-term collab is that, yeah, we're just, it's there's not really an agenda for it.
Mhm.
It's kind of taking the shape that it needs to take.
Mhm.
Um, but that's the direction it's going
Cool. Is it kind of like a Rumspringa kind of vibe, like a,
in.
you know what I mean?
I don't know if those are related.
I don't know.
I'll
I
look
don't
into that.
know. But all amazing work. We're also, of course, performing our music from our Young Composer Competition winners this past year from Zach Goluboff and his piece Iridescence, and then Jonah Cohen with That Special Place. And when the Bergamot Quartet or you compose music, sorry, not compose, perform music from these young artists or really kind of like cutting edge new and upcoming composers, and of course, as yourself being in that category. What do you think is really the focus of today's new compositions or composers? Like, what are the boundaries they're pushing? What seems to be expanding or being explored?
Um, Good question. I've kind of been asking myself this question lately because I don't really know. I almost have this sense that because um the idea of new music kind of encapsulates like 100 years of music at this point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we still call a lot of things that were written like, in before 1950 as contemporary music. Um, and with the advent of technology as a very accessible
Mhm.
tool and texture in composition, it's like anything is possible. And as kind of an international field too, there's so much exchange happening across the world with music pedagogy and just what people are hearing
Mhm.
and recording and working on. I kind of something that I've noticed, at least just within my own circles, is this question of like, is simple music good? Should we should we do simple music? I'm sure that's a question that's been being asked by composers for a long time, but within that context of like modern music. But
Yeah.
I feel like it's a big one for my peers and I right now is do we try to push boundaries in the sense of acknowledging that, musical technique is always deepening because technology of instruments gets better. The tradition of complexity in music gets deeper and deeper. Um, People are continually pushing boundaries in that way. Or should we kind of return to maybe a less academic and more um, popular music focused sort of vibe?
Mhm.
um, that feels like kind of a big question in new music to me right now. Um, I think in American new music, there often tends to be a kind of foreground of people wanting to engage with various folk traditions or with popular music, especially when using electronics. Um, but I think that more of like a European new complexity tradition is still very influential in the music being written right now. Um, and I think as a member of a quartet that specializes in contemporary music,
Mhm.
um, and I'm actually in just a couple of hours I'll be performing with another new music ensemble that I play with called Earspace, and I've seen that in this group too. Um, it's so all over the map. And I think it's kind of a cool opportunity for people that are specializing in performing new music or people that are just interested in engaging with it who might be solely coming from a traditional classical background or who aren't engaged with classical tradition at all but want to engage with contemporary music. There's a lot you can choose from and there's a lot of ways that you can kind of choose to focus skills that you're honing. um,
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm really interested to see what kind of stands out as representative of the 2020s, like in 30 years from now, you know?
Right, yeah. Absolutely. And especially, I mean, Tribeca new music itself is a good example of what you just said. I mean, I feel like everything
Mhm.
under the sun is performed in terms of new music.
Mhm.
And such a wide timeline too, of course.
Mhm.
But yeah, great. Our last question is, what are you listening to nowadays? And what performances have you gone to? Anything you want to mention? Anything coming up other than our November 2nd show?
Okay, that's a big question. In terms of what are you listening to, I'm always really all over the